I think this narrative about he's got no plan, Andy Burnham, the man without a plan, is completely wrong.
That's Andrew Marr's take on the upcoming premiership of Andy Burnham, which starts in a few days' time. And it's worth listening to Andrew Marr because he's one of the few journalists who has actually interviewed Burnham in the pre-Prime Ministerial period since he won the Makerfield by-election. He's also a former political editor of the BBC. So that's who I will be chatting to in this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and please welcome back to the BBC, well, for the next 27 minutes at least, Andrew Marr. Hello.
Hello, Adam.
How are you doing?
I'm pretty fair, thank you. Enjoying the weather.
Nice to be back, because you're in our Westminster studio, so that is your old office.
It's the old stamping ground. Not much has changed here. Some of the people, none of the furniture.
I think the carpet's changed since you were a political editor, but I mean, it's still rubbish, but
it's
it has
still
changed.
fairly horrible, but yes, it's a different horrible, maybe.
You know what, let's talk about the past before we talk about the very near future. What was it like observing Starmer's last PMQs on Wednesday?
Do you know what, Adam? I'm a big softie. And unlike many of my colleagues, I was quite moved by it. I thought, here is everybody behaving generously and well. Kemi Badenoch found a new tonal range and, she was generous. And Starmer talked about how she had reached out to him when his house was attacked by arsonists and when his family had been targeted and so on, and when his brother had died. And I just thought, this is politics at its best. It's not a sort of cynical uni-party getting together, we're all on the same side, really, because they really disagree. But all around the chamber, I thought there was a genuine degree of sort of sadness, and they wanted him to go with dignity. And whatever his failures to feel that he had been a man respected for why he was in politics. And by the way, he made some very good jokes. So overall, I enjoyed it.
When do you think was the moment that Starmer was done for? When did you call it?
Well, I have been pretty disobliging now for quite a few months, probably 6 months or so. I was just looking at the polls the whole time and thinking we're getting to the point where there is no coming back for the Labour Party under this guy in this situation. I think the May elections were probably the final moment. I think the smouldering Mandelson scandal made a lot of people think he just doesn't have the judgment in terms of the people around him. He hasn't got frankly, the curiosity about other people that a leader needs. And therefore, this is only going to get worse.
And what do you make of the fact that one of his last acts as Prime Minister is going to Ukraine, seeing Zelensky, another leader that you've sat with and chatted to at length, and signing this deal to use British money to pay for Swedish fighter jets?
Well, this is, as it were, the baton being handed over for the second time, because although Starmer despised, and I think the word isn't too strong, Boris Johnson was admired by Starmer for what he did standing up for Ukraine during a difficult time. He then passes the baton on to Starmer. Now, in a way, this is just what Britain does, except that Starmer had to deal with Trump at his most Trumpian and difficult and rambunctious. And it wasn't easy for Starmer. And I think he feels a genuine, and I would argue, natural and correct sense of pride for what he's done. And I think going there for the final time, both very emotional for Starmer, but also he's sending a signal to Andy Burnham. He's saying, Andy, whatever your faults and strengths, you don't know much about foreign affairs. This is one part of foreign affairs you simply can't ignore.
Well, and I was just thinking about Henry Zeffman's interview with Starmer, his final interview, where he the only piece of advice he gave any future Prime Minister, not necessarily Andy Burnham by name, was, you can't ignore foreign policy because foreign policy ends up at home.
It was really difficult for him because that never hear Keir jibe did him a lot of damage. There were a lot of people looking at aspects of domestic policy who felt that they couldn't get FaceTime with the Prime Minister, couldn't get him to understand what was going wrong, and were frustrated by the sheer number of foreign trips he made, including to COP, NC, and to Paris and NATO and the United Nations and Ukraine and. But, he's right. We are in a world where foreign policy affects daily life more than ever before.
Although it's interesting you mentioned COP, the UN Climate Change Conference, because I think the last one, he was originally not going to go, but then the Greens started doing better. And so actually domestic politics sort of, or at least his perception of domestic politics demanded that he go all the way to South America.
And a man we may come on to discuss later on, Ed Miliband, may have had a word as well.
Right, let's talk about Andy Burnham, though. So you're one of the few people that have interviewed Andy Burnham, Prime Minister sort of designate.
That's
because
right.
you spoke to him at the start of the month. I mean, how did that come about? Did you just bump into him and say, "Come on my show"?
No, I mean, I certainly texted him and said that. I've been speaking to him on and off for a couple of years now, just about what he was thinking about politics. I interviewed him for LBC a couple of years ago in Manchester, and I found it a very, very interesting interview. I genuinely think he's a hugely impressive politician. But I was talking to him about this idea that he flip-flopped. He's been a Blairite, he's been a this, he's been a that, he's been all over the shop politically. And he said to me, do you know what? All that time, ever since I came south, first to Cambridge University, and then got into politics, and then in the House of Commons, I have suffered from a really acute sense of imposter syndrome. I didn't really know who I was or what I was doing or why. And it was only when I went back to the COP in the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster and heard that huge booing for the government's handling of it, I kind of remembered who I was. And I find that, a compelling account of his own. Of course, everybody makes a certain fiction of their own lives, but I find that quite compelling. And I've been talking to him ever since. I wouldn't say he's a close friend or anything like that, but he's certainly somebody I've been in contact with.
Rewatching the interview, because it was the 2nd of July, so rewatching it with 2 weeks hindsight, I think the thing that really struck me is just how confident and fluent he seems about what he wants and what he's going to do, although there's not much detail behind that, but he seemed very in command in your studio.
Yes, I think this narrative about he's got no plan, Andy Burnham, the man without a plan, is completely wrong. I think he has got a plan, or at least he thinks he knows what he wants to do with the country, and it's around devolution, and it's around all those communities like Makerfield, which have felt left behind, needing a bit more money in their pockets, as he says, a bit of breathing space, a bit of respite, and then a programme of reindustrialisation, a programme of investment, and a certain amount of more public control of those utilities. I think his analysis of the neoliberal impact on the country, it's partial, and lots of people disagree with it, but it is coherent.
I mean, I'm just thinking of one of your other hats, which was the presenter of your documentary series on the BBC, which was basically British history for the last 100 years. Yeah. Do you think his critique of neoliberalism is valid? Is it backed up by evidence? Because some people say it's a bit of a sort of like a slightly sixth formy studenty thing to say about the last 50 years of British politics.
I think it depends very much where you're sitting. I think if you're sitting in any of those parts of the English Midlands or North, or indeed parts of the Scottish Midlands as well, where deindustrialisation completely changed the landscape in a very, very short space of time. I mean, you think of parts of South Yorkshire, within a few years, it looked and felt and sounded completely different. And there were hundreds of communities who just felt completely bereft and ignored and, frankly, what's the word?
Left behind.
Insulted,
Insulted. Okay. That's an interesting way of putting it.
They kind of felt insulted.
Yeah.
And I think from that perspective, the impact of deindustrialisation during the Thatcher years, even if you argue, as most people I think now would, that it allowed economic growth of a different kind to take off and tilted the entire economy towards financial services and services generally and further towards the southeast, which gave the UK some really good years of growth. Even accepting all of that, the impact on too much of Britain was too negative to be pushed to one side. I think the impact of selling off all of those council houses, great for all those people who were in the council house and for the first time in their lives got a chance to actually own their own house, which is what people mostly want. Great for them, but we have had a social housing crisis ever since. So I think there are big parts of it which are undeniably true. Turning it around is a massive, massive task. And I don't know what Andy Burnham is going to do with election timing, whether he's going to try and do 2 or 3 years and then go, or whether he's going to go early. But he's certainly going to need more than the time allowed to him and the rest of this Parliament to start to make those changes, because they're very big ones.
And certainly Andy Burnham's definition of neoliberalism, or the example he gives in the interview with you from a couple of weeks ago, is about the water industry, where he says that the investors who buy the water companies get to keep the profits, invest a little bit of it in the service that we all then endure, and actually don't really have to pick up the tab in a big way for when the service is bad. So that's kind of an example of neoliberalism, about privatising things, getting the profit motive in and affecting the costs for everyone else.
I think I read that about a quarter of most people's water bills goes to the shareholders at the moment. And in this period where we look to Count Binface for a lot of political wisdom, I think his policy of obliging all water company bosses to swim in their own rivers is one that commands a lot of popularity around the country.
Full list of Clacton by-election candidates available on the BBC News website. Not sure if you have to
Well
say
done,
that on
Adam.
LBC, but we do.
We do too. Yep.
Good. And then in terms of the only other interview that Andy Burnham has done, which was with Gary Lineker on The Rest is Football. And you can see why he did that, because it was England v Argentina. It was also this is the week where the government announced its new Hillsborough law about candour in public office. So you can see why he maybe would want to speak to Gary Lineker. I also thought, did he seem a little bit starstruck in that interview?
Well, I think if you're into football, and he really is, then Gary Lineker remains a very, very substantial star.
I'm sure he was starstruck with you two a bit. So you're legendary in your field.
Do you know what, Adam? I didn't pick that up. Weirdly, I didn't pick that up.
He certainly won't be starstruck if he ever does an interview with Newscast. But one of the other things that came out of that Gary Lineker interview is when Gary says to him, "Oh, what about introducing a wealth tax on the very rich?" And Burnham sort of hedges his bets, which leads to news stories in the papers today saying he hasn't ruled out a wealth tax. And he also does say that maybe a little bit down the line, people might have to pay a bit more. So tax rises for everyone.
I think some form of wealth tax is quite likely. Almost every form of wealth tax that has been described so far has problems with it. Almost every kind of tax has problems with it. But he is very, very boxed in by those promises, which I think wrongly Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer made in the 2024 election. The economic outlook is not great. You know, he hasn't got quite as acutely bad an inheritance as Keir Starmer did 2 years ago, but it's pretty rough, pretty bad. And if he wants to invest, then he has to find money from somewhere. And I think some form of land value tax, he's very, very interested in land value taxes, by the way, or some form of property tax different from the system we have at the moment, perhaps combined with cutting or entirely abolishing stamp duty might be the way he goes.
And he has said explicitly one of his policies that he ran on during the by-election in Makerfield was that you increase the business rates on some things. That's like big warehouses for people like Amazon, so that you can cut business rates for pubs and restaurants and hairdressers, businesses on the high street that have a sort of bit of a social aspect to them. So actually that's one very specific thing he has promised to do.
And Adam, if we are trying to find, phrases to describe what Burnhamism is, and everybody is struggling, including me, I think there's a kind of element of centre-left populism about that proposal, which I think is interesting. It matches some of the sort of populist ideas from other parts of the spectrum. It's simple, you're going to grasp it easily, and it's the small businesses that you rely on and versus these big faceless American giants.
Although interestingly, when he's talking to Gary Lineker about the wealth tax, and it's interesting that Gary Lineker badges it as a wealth tax on the very wealthy, as opposed to high earners, which could affect a lot more people. Andy Burnham says he doesn't want to create divisions. He doesn't want to pit different groups against each other. Well,
I think the real problem with as it were, the Lineker approach is that the very, very wealthy can go wherever they like. They are more mobile than they have ever been in world history. And, you jack up the taxes on them just a little bit and you suddenly find they're all living in the north of Italy, around Milan, or they're in Switzerland, or they're in the States or somewhere else. It's very, very hard to tax birds that fly that quickly.
One of the other things he says to Gary Lineker, I keep nearly saying Gary as if we're close mates, we're absolutely not, but to Gary Lineker, is that he's going to take his time. And that's one of the things that jumps out for me from that interview, that maybe we're not going to get a whole load of big bang things on day 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and that maybe we'll have to wait till the budget, which might not be till November or maybe even early December, for some real kind of meaty stuff.
He's been very lucky in the timing so far, and that's partly because of Keir Starmer dictating when he was going to go. But, he becomes Labour leader today, we're talking on Friday. He becomes Prime Minister, we assume, on Monday. And then the Commons is away for 4 or 5 weeks. So he has quite a long period where he's going to go around the country and talk to audiences everywhere around the country. But he has got lots of time to work further on his plans, as will his new cabinet. So in a sense, this deliberativeness, this stage-by-stage, step-by-step approach, which he has taken very much to the making of the cabinet. I mean, the pressure on him from cabinet ministers who are doing their nuts at the moment because they don't know what's going to happen. Really frustrated. Some of them very, very angry indeed. All little dribs and drabs coming out, but no real briefing, no real confirmation of what Andy Burnham is going to do. Burnham is already running an extremely tight team. And I think we'll carry on seeing that over the course of the summer. He will dictate when he is going to announce what policies. I mean, of course, there'll be lots of ministers involved then, so it can't be quite as tight. But I think this is somebody who has a plan and who understands you don't throw it all out in the first couple of days.
I wonder if we're going to have a Bank of England independence style moment, because I always thought when Starmer and Reeves came in July 2024, they'll do something big like Blair and Brown did on day 2 of their government, where they gave Bank of England control over interest rates, took the politics out of interest rates. And I thought Labour people are obsessed with that moment in political history. Surely Starmer and Reeves will deliver a sort of equivalent moment. And they never did.
They didn't, but I think that's a very shrewd thought, Adam. I think it's exactly the way that Andy Burnham is thinking. You know, he knows people are defined really very, very quickly in this modern, very fast-moving political media age, within days, perhaps within hours sometimes. Something sets in the public mind. And therefore, if he can grab our attention with something that is popular, seems, the more we think about it, to be obvious, then that will be exactly what he's thinking about. I don't know what it could be. Maybe abolition of the House of Lords, maybe voting reform. I don't know.
Although classically, that's always been a third-term thing for prime ministers, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you say you're going to do it, it's going to be in the manifesto, and you prepare now, you could do it. It's the kind of thing an awful lot of people up and down the country, they think the House of Lords is absolutely ridiculous and bloated and pretty much useless. They don't understand the subtle constitutional arguments for it. And I think a Senate of the Nations and Regions or something like that to replace it would be very popular, and you can announce it and you can get people working on it. And, you know, that's the kind of thing. I mean, the Bank of England independence wasn't easy either.
No. And also, how many big things like that are there still to do in British politics?
Absolutely.
There's not many equivalent things. You could just go, right, let's do that at the stroke of a pen. You talked about all the gossip around the potential cabinet. Some people seem and wise people seem very sure that Shabana Mahmood is going to be the Chancellor. Do you buy that?
I do buy that, actually. And I'll explain why. I mean, there's a very strong argument for Ed Miliband, which I'd like to make first, which is that you need somebody atop the Treasury who understands the Treasury, who isn't going to be blocked and stopped and frustrated by the Treasury. And Ed Miliband is probably that person. Secondly, the bond markets and everybody else feels that the big challenge for this Labour government is, can they get control of public spending? To do that, you have to do welfare reform. And the argument is that you need a figure from the soft left, trusted by the soft left of the Labour Party in Parliament, to get that kind of change through. So in a kind of Nixon to China sense, Ed Miliband might be the guy to get welfare spending down, reassure the bond markets, and get on top of the Treasury. The argument against him is that he's terribly unpopular with the unions, he's very unpopular with the media, particularly the right-wing media, and of course the city as well. And the bond markets wouldn't be happy, and all of that. And also, I suppose, he's a man who knows who he is so strongly that Andy Burnham might be worried that he would feel that he was running the Ed Miliband government and that Andy Burnham was the kind of front man. So those are the arguments going on. Shabana Mahmood hasn't got great economic experience, to put it politely, but she is somebody who believes very strongly in the economics of place. Like Andy Burnham, she's a person of faith, rooted in community, and she has in the past been an advocate of a 50p income tax top rate, for instance, and I think a wealth tax as well. So the notion that she's well to the right is completely wrong, but she would certainly reassure the markets. And you've already seen bond market yields improving as that rumour got out, and you've seen the pound slightly strengthening as that rumour got out. So I think if Andy Burnham wants a Chancellor who will do the Andy Burnham business without their own agenda and yet is a good deliverer, that is probably what has tilted it, if it has, for her.
And also, very superficially, she's from the Midlands, so it gives you a little bit of regional balance at the top of the government as well. So it's not just all Northerners or North and South.
There is the Midlands. We'd all forgotten about the Midlands. Sorry, Midlands.
Speak for yourself. I think about them frequently. I also just think one other thing that I gleaned from re-listening to your interview is that he talked, or maybe it's the Gary Lineker interview, but in one of the two interviews, which are the only two that he's given in this whole period, slightly weirdly, although maybe understandably, is he talks about, and it's the example of how you get the housing benefits bill down is by building more social housing. But he says you have to do that over a longer period. I wonder if whoever is Chancellor will end up with a new fiscal rule, or the same fiscal rule, but over a longer period. Because the second fiscal rule at the moment is to have debt as a share of GDP falling by the end of a 5-year rolling future period.
It's always 5 years.
And they never hit it because the spending cuts that would be required can never be delivered. So they always just go, oh no, we'll just hit the target in 2 years later than we planned.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe he'll just stretch that out to 10 years. And so when he talks about building stability into the political system so that you're less reliant on the whims of the bond markets, as he would see it on a day-to-day basis, is that if you instantly make it 10 years, you've bought yourself an extra loads of years.
Well, I'm learning a lot in this interview, Adam. I have
it's all
to say.
Speculation on my part.
Here's some more speculation on my part. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Angela Rayner move to some job like Deputy Prime Minister in Number 10 North with a specific remit to do council housing and to do devolution. I think that's the kind of change we might see. Just as I think it's possible that we'll see the growth of, effectively, a new department based around AI and the future economy sitting alongside the Treasury.
Angela Rayner as not Deputy Prime Minister, but a sort of John Prescott super ministry head based in Manchester, just down the road. Except she's bought her house in Hove.
Well,
she's based in the South Coast now, famously.
She'll have to heave from Hove quickly.
From Hove.
I think also, Ed Miliband very much hopes and wants Deputy Prime Minister as well. So there's yet another hard choice in front of Andy Burnham right now. To govern is to choose, and it's going to be a pretty sweltering, sticky few days for him.
I've just remembered another reason why it's great that you're on today, because I remember when we were at the G7 summit in Cornwall when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, you recommended a book to me called English Journey by J.B. Priestley.
Great book.
Which is basically like his sort of, he just travels around Britain doing a State of the Nation thing. And actually that's what we're all about to do, isn't it? Because Andy Burnham is going to make places so central to our politics.
Always worthwhile bringing J.B. Priestley with you. I like him even more than Orwell in many ways because he sees all the in-between places. There's a great bit when he's travelling around near Wolverhampton or somewhere and he's looking on the horizon. You can see this great big dark smoking menacing object which is Birmingham. He's still living in an England which is industrialised. It's got lots of typewriter factories and list factories and shoemaking towns and the rest of it. And in a sense, I guess that's what Andy Burnham would love to bring back.
So 2 last questions. One is a historical one and one is a philosophical one. So really, really easy to end on. Historical. You were the political editor when the handover happened from Blair to Brown.
Yes.
You were the political editor when Gordon Brown famously told you he wasn't going to have an election and had never been planning to have one, which we know is not true. Do you see any parallels between that last big handover amongst Labour and this big handover?
Well, I think Keir Starmer goes in a much sunnier mood, weirdly, than Tony Blair did. It was, he's had much less time, and I think everybody would agree, much less achievement to go. But actually, I think he has come to terms with the idea in a way that Tony Blair, even as he was leaving, and even perhaps today, had not. The danger in that parallel, of course, is one that Andy Burnham should be thinking hard about over the next couple of days, which is that if you have a rift, a serious rift between numbers 10 and 11, a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who both have ambitions for the top and slightly different visions, that is lethal and sapping and very, very demoralising for any government.
I mean, I am surprised that Team Burnham have allowed there to be so much speculation about this person's in as Chancellor, that person's in, no, this person, because that creates bad blood even before you've made the decision. So
it's difficult. But the problem, of course, is that he is not, even now, Prime Minister. And I think constitutionally, to announce who's going to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, while there is a Chancellor of the Exchequer and you're not Prime Minister, would get lots of accusations of arrogance and going far too fast. And who does he think he is?
Anyway, I shouldn't make any predictions because I famously said on air the day that Theresa May was anointed as Prime Minister that all the divisions in the Conservative Party over Brexit would close up because they were all professional politicians who wanted to win the next election. So that's why I don't make predictions anymore.
Well, I vaguely remember some fool who was on Question Time, I think, at the beginning of the Starmer year, the Starmer government, and said that Britain was going to be an ocean of peace and stability and calm. I can't remember who that
well,
was. Clearly an idiot, anyway.
Well, sorry to be mean and a bad host, but that was going to be my last question. The philosophical one which is you did that tweet on X when Starmer came in, and basically along those lines.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, I mean, do you feel we can ever have a period where Britain is a haven of political tranquility, or is actually this is just it now?
Perhaps not. We should remind ourselves that although we've been talking a lot about the transition of power inside the Labour Party, Reform remain by far the most popular party across the country, which suggests that there is still a yearning for a really big change. Now, Andy Burnham's promise is, I can be that change. Next 2 years will tell.
Andrew, you got to go off and do your LBC show. So thank you very much for taking time out of your prep to speak to us. Andrew, take care.
Adam, thank you very much.